Building a business can feel like a roller coaster.
Financial headaches, hiring drama, and marketing overwhelm are just a few things that make for a bumpy experience. But with the right people sitting next to you, you might actually enjoy the ride.
That's why we started Breaking Even Better, to demystify entrepreneurship so we can make the ups and downs a hell of a lot more fun.
Each week, we'll bring you the raw, real, and unfiltered insights from our own experiences and expertise. If you're ready for no BS, honest stories, and a lot of laughter, then buckle in and listen up.
And let's ride this roller coaster together. Welcome to Breaking Even Better, the podcast where we toss the hustle harder rule book out the window and talk some real ish that goes down when you're building a business. I am Trish Saman here with my co-host, Ms.
I am Brenda.
You are Brenda. Miss Carolina will not be joining us today because she is way too busy and important for us today, apparently. But we've got somebody that might be somebody who could fill those shoes quite nicely, which is one Ms. Julie B. So, Ms. Julie B., why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an author, speaker, and I would say the bulk of the work I do these days is to help business owners make more profit with less stress. So I do that in a lot of ways. I work with a lot of companies, but that is the gist of what I do. And I'm super, super proud of my book, Burned, how business owners can overcome burnout and fuel success. And that is, I'm very passionate about talking about this because it's just so important in our world and for entrepreneurs.
I would agree with that. Brenda, have you ever experienced burnout? Has that ever happened
Well,
to you?
all the time. I might be in it now. So I'm excited about today. As she mentioned, she is the author, the speaker, the No BS Miss Julie B. I wanted to know a few things. I can't wait to dive into this subject a little bit more. But when was the moment when you realized, oh, damn, this just isn't the day? This is burnout.
When I was in the hospital with a panic attack, then I thought I was
Mm,
having a heart attack. That was that was the moment. Yeah, it was August 2021, and I had just gone through some really stressful things, more in my personal life than in my business. But when you combine those two things, it can just kind of implode on you. And I woke up one morning, all the symptoms of a woman having a heart attack, and I went to the ER, and after, 10 hours sitting in the ER, found out that it was a panic attack. And that was the minute that I knew I had to make some serious changes and really adjust how I approached work and life. That line gets so blurred as business owners. So I had to come up
mhm.
with, system to manage it basically.
It's funny because in the book, you do talk a little bit about how finding those signs, like burnout, isn't exactly obvious. Like you can have a bad day or you can have a bad week, but it isn't always the most obvious. So obviously, when it came to fruition, it came to a fine point, you found yourself in the hospital. But in hindsight, were there things that crept up first? Were there things that you're like, man, I should have seen that I was really struggling? Like, in other words, for our listeners, what are some things that people might need to look for? And obviously, it's different for everybody, but I'm just curious what happened with you.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing I'm really big about in the book is measuring your burnout signs. And there's a whole couple of chapters about that I talk through, and we can talk about that a little bit. But for me, it usually starts with my attention is just awful. Like I can't focus on anything, even
Mm,
more than my typical, ADHD brain that I have as an entrepreneur.
right.
And, then it usually progresses to I get really socially withdrawn. I cancel doctor's appointments that aren't like, urgent doctor's appointments, regular checkups and stuff. Marcy, my wife, will find me laying face down on the couch, and just
Mm,
kind of like writhing and just making those types of noises because I just don't know what else to do.
right.
My sleep gets really messed up. Those are just some things that I've seen for me. Some other things that I've seen. Sleep is almost always one for business owners. Some business owners say yes to everything when they're burned out. They just can't say no. They just keep saying yes, which is very interesting to me.
Hmm.
and getting sick a lot, aches and pains that just you can't find any explanation for. Your emotional regulation, usually at work, is completely opposite of the norm. So if you're normally like a calm, rational person at work, you'll find that you're not that when you're in
Hmm.
burnout. So it's I've broken it down to it goes kind of through three stages. It's the attention level part, then it gets into emotional burnout, and then it gets into physical burnout. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, most business owners, especially their first or second time through burnout, they don't really catch it until it's in the physical part, which is where I was when I was in the hospital that day.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times those key points that you mentioned, the saying yes to everything or just not even being really present in your day, people kind of misinterpret that. And I feel like that's an important key. We have to make sure we pay attention to those signs of being burnt out. I felt like it a long time ago. It's another story. We was getting ready to go to bike week in Daytona. We was leaving on Thursday and this was Monday night. And I think my daughter came in, she was like, "You look so drained." And
Mm.
I was mentally, physically, and everything. And that Tuesday, my husband said the same thing. I said, "I don't feel like I'm in the right headspace to be on a motorcycle that long." Because it's like a 7-hour ride from Charlotte to Daytona. I said, "I don't feel like I'm in a headspace." He's like, "Well, what you want to do?" I said, "Well, Cancun looks nice." And that's what I did. I booked Cancun and we went, just me and him, and we just laid around the whole time and I felt so much better. But I think I was at my wit's end at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I had a
mm,
business owner tell me once she knows she's burned out when vacations start to feel like oxygen.
yeah, yeah,
Wow. What an
And
interesting analogy.
that really, like, you're not going to survive much longer without one.
that part.
Now, I firmly believe vacations don't fix burnout at all because you still
Right.
Hmm.
got a mess to deal with when you come back, but they can help you have that break. If you can
Hmm.
truly go on vacation and not work, that's the thing.
Right,
It
that
can
was the
help you
point.
start
Right.
to get some capacity to deal with burnout when you get back.
Right.
Yes.
I
Mm,
feel like if you gas up your tank, that's your vacation. But if the engine's inherently broken or run down, like no level of gas in the tank is going to help a broken
right.
engine, essentially, you know? So I want to talk about something else too. And I remember discussing burnout with some colleagues, but specifically with you, Julie. And I can remember being on vacation when you and I met to speak about the book well before you published it.
Yeah.
And I was literally sitting in a condo at the beach talking about burnout. And even just talking about it, I could feel my heart pounding. I could feel myself getting anxious. And I think the part that I personally needed to address was the shame that's associated with burnout. And like there's this who works harder and I don't know, the badge of honor that comes with busy and that you're just running and like look at I'm so busy and important and I have all these entrepreneurial things to do and I've got my family to manage and I've got this second business I'm running and oh by the way I'm going to write 10 books, going to be an American bestseller. Oh, I may also become an astronaut and go to the moon. I don't know, like I may do all of the things in all the land. So like what I found though is that is it saying that you're burned out and that you just don't have capacity to stay focused and you don't have capacity to run your business or manage a team or manage your family, like if you're not fried, you're trying, are you even an entrepreneur if you're not burning yourself out? Like how do we as entrepreneurs start rewriting that script and that narrative around the badge of busy and burnout?
Yeah, and that's a big one. I think one of the reasons why burnout is such a hard conversation to have is that, and it's hard for a lot of people in a lot of different industries. I think moms feel it a lot as a mom, if they're not
Mm-hmm.
doing everything that they're supposed to do. The first step is just recognizing that, the hustle culture is BS. And I think there's also this era of I started this business and now I need to prove to everyone that I can do this business. And there's a lot of internal conflict there when, you're making decisions between what are you going to what are you going to do for work and what are you going to do for your personal life? And so the way that I address that is I try to I recognize that and then I say, okay, let's put that aside for a minute. How do you want to show up at work every day? And what does your ideal work day look like? Like, how do you want to show up for your team? How do you want to show up for yourself? How do you want to show up for your clients, whoever it is? And then also, how do you want to show up in your personal life? And trying to find where those things can kind of integrate. I don't believe work-life balance is the right word for entrepreneurs. I think it's work-life integration because we're either always working or it's really hard for us to shut it off. So
Right.
I
Wow,
try to
that's
back it up
great.
and say, what do you want this to look like? And then let's figure out where you are and how to get there. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And I think what happens is we have so many other things going on. We get frustrated with, change is never easy and trying to go through the process of making that change. So I just try to make it simple and say, what do you want it to look like? And sometimes, Trish and Brenda, that even that question is overwhelming. So I'm like, what is one thing you would like to be different?
Mm,
How you show up to your workplace, and what is one thing you want to be different with how you show up at home? Let's start there. So
Wow.
it depends on where the person is, but I really like the one thing question because if you're really burned out, I think you can kind of start to wrap your mind around that instead of being, overwhelmed with trying to figure it all out at one time.
yeah, I think there
And
are
usually
two.
it starts with one thing. So it usually
Agreed.
starts with just the one. Okay.
And I
Yeah.
feel like it can start with any one thing. It doesn't even have to be a big thing or a little thing.
Yeah.
But I really love the point that you made with regards to, and I know that Brenda and I deal with this because we know one another. I mean, I know you as well, Julie, but Brenda and I have dealt with this where there's the work life integration is so much better than work life balance because it does give the false dichotomy that the two are independent from one
Yep.
another, and they're not. They're absolutely not. The integration word is really kind of that linchpin. It is, and it's when one takes over too much, and there isn't integration where you really do burn yourself out. It's actually one of the things I love about the most about being an entrepreneur is that the flexibility, despite how overwhelmed we can all get, if I need to run somewhere and do something or have a doctor's appointment or just take a day off without telling anybody I'm taking a day off, like that needs to be a part. I
Yeah.
don't know how I'd function if I needed to ask for permission. I'm just not good at asking for permission for
Most
things.
of us aren't.
Right. Yeah, I'm not the one. So,
So
wow.
why so then the question I have two question follow-ups to that. One, then why I feel like we almost feel like we have to ask permission to deal with burnout to whomever we're asking it to
Right.
because of
That's
all
so
those
true.
expectations we put on ourselves. So you don't have to ask permission when you're the business owner, when you're the entrepreneur, like
Right.
you get to write the book. So make
Yeah.
sure the burnout is dealt with in that book. And when it comes to balance, I don't like that word because to me it just means constantly weighing on a scale.
Right.
Right.
When I hear balance, I think about a scale, and it's like you're constantly juggling to try to keep it here.
Right.
That's I just don't like that feeling of constantly juggling. So I got rid of that term for myself a while ago.
That's good. I like integration much better than balance
Me
because,
too.
like you said, it is like it's two independent things, and it really is not. You have to, everything is all intertwined some way, somehow.
Agreed.
Um, One of the things I was wanting to hear from you in your book, like what's your favorite excerpt of the book? Your favorite.
Oh my gosh. You know what's funny is I am just now reading my book as a consumer.
Huh.
When you write a book, you read it so many times in so many different ways. I've read it, sat down, read it straight through, I think 6 times now for various purposes. One was when the final manuscript happened, one was to prepare for the audio read, and then
Hmm.
one was like earlier on than that. And I'm just now starting to read through it as a consumer. So I think that's just an interesting thing as an author. But my favorite parts of the book are chapter 2, which talks about red flags, burnout red flags, which is that's where I really get into explaining how to actually measure where you are on a burnout scale so you can turn it around before you get all the way to physical burnout.
Right.
That is my favorite chapter. My favorite excerpt, though, I think is in chapter 4, where I talk about saying no to new. And that
Okay.
is when people ask me how to make space to actually address burnout, that part is so crucial that you learn how to say no to new that in all of this work. It's kind of like one of those foundational principles in the book because if you can't say no to new things, you're not going to have the space to take care of burnout.
So if you listen to this conversation and you feel like you may be going through burnout, you feel like you don't know the red signs, then subscribe, share, like this episode, and talk about it in the DMs so we can talk with you and maybe even get Julie B back on.
I would agree. So I did want to point something out. One of the things that you mentioned in the book, Burn, is that boundaries are non-negotiable. So we like talked a little bit about this. You kind of touched on it a moment ago, but can you offer up some examples that some of our entrepreneur listeners can use that are boundaries that, saved your sanity and kind of helped you, and ultimately they can, adjust for themselves. But what are some boundaries that are non-negotiables that you implemented?
Yeah, the interesting thing about boundaries is I think it's easy to say them, but it's the hardest work is holding them for
Oh
yourself.
yeah,
That is like because you
that
have
is
to
the
be
work.
that is the work. So one thing that I did was from a family perspective, and Trish, I've had a lot of family things going on in the past couple of years with various family members, but I stopped receiving phone calls and texts from my family members during the workday
Hmm.
because it was really easy to spiral out of control. Like if I got something that stressed me out about something that was going on with one of my family members who's dealing with substance abuse issues, that would ruin my whole workday. I mean, I
Oh
would,
yeah.
and then that stresses you out because you're like, I didn't get that done. I got to do it tomorrow. So that was one of the boundaries that I had to set. And, I let my family know. And I was like, if it's a true emergency, call Marcy, my wife, if
Right.
it's really a true
Right.
emergency because I still get them, but I just get them after work.
Sure.
So I had to do that. One of the other boundaries I set with my team, which was really hard for me to do, was I stepped out of leading the meetings and had them lead the meetings. And that entails a level of withholding opinions
Hmm.
because you hire these people to be experts and you need them to be experts and
That's
you
right.
you're there to lead and understanding like setting that boundary of I'm the leader, not the expert in this anymore. I'm the leader of this company. That was a boundary that I really had to set. And finally, I had some people in my business life that were causing me issues and I should have set the boundary a long, long time ago, but for whatever reason I didn't. And I finally just said, like, I ain't got no time for this. I don't have
Right.
time for drama. I don't have time for that in my business life. And so I cut a couple of people just out of my network and stopped talking with them, which was one of the hardest things to do, but probably one of the best things to do to protect my mental health in some ways. So those are just some examples of what I did. And then I asked for accountability too. I have a coach. I would tell my wife what I was doing. I would tell some of my best friends what I was doing and saying, like, if I cancel dinner with you, please check in on me because that means I'm socially withdrawing and I might be heading
Right.
towards burnout. So I did some of that stuff too. So I think
So
the hardest work is to hold those boundaries, though.
with those boundaries in mind,
Mhm.
and you've told everybody the boundaries. Have you had any kickback from your friends, from your teammates, from your colleagues? And how did you handle that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the people that I let know that, like, the business associates I let know that I was like, listen, this relationship's run its course. There wasn't much kickback in that because, like, we were both feeling that. But probably the hardest was with the family. My siblings got a little bit upset with me because I wasn't available for, aging parental calls all the time. And my family really values money. So I was able to, I know what's important to them. And so I was able to put it into terms that they would get. Like every hour I spend working on family stuff during the week is money out of my pocket. So I need you to respect that boundary. So I think there's an element of like knowing the people who are in your life, kind of what their core values are and what their motivations might be. And if you can frame your own boundaries to be in alignment with what they value, you're going to get a lot more respect. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I approach that. You know, it's not manipulative, it's just speaking their language.
I'm
You may
speaking
not,
their language, right?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you may not have their like you may not have the same values or motivations, but speaking their language, they will understand it and respect it faster if you go that route.
It's good to know.
It is. I do think that, like you said, getting back to that integration word, it's interesting because a lot of our family members are also not entrepreneurs. They don't own their own gig, or they've worked for someone else, or perhaps they've gone their whole life. And in their partnership, they're not the one that leaves to go to work. They are the one that stays home and manages the home. So there's lots of different people who have lots of different values. And when you're not beholden to someone, you don't work for someone, you're working for yourself, you're working for your own business. People think that because you're either home or because you make your own schedule that you're available. So that's why boundaries are almost more important for an entrepreneur in an attempt to prevent not just professional burnout, but personal burnout, because it can be a bit much when you don't have the opportunity to truly click into work and lock in. So with that in mind, I would love for you to walk us through again. And I know we've touched on a little bit, but I'd like to kind of start pulling it into one kind of like key takeaway. Like, can you walk us through what, for any business owner who's listening today, like what can they start right now? What's an example of one thing they can start to start preventing burnout? So obviously setting boundaries, but in addition to that, is there any one thing that you would recommend from an operational
Mhm.
standpoint
Yeah.
or cat or any of those, spaces where they can just get started now? Because even just the thought of burnout can be overwhelming, which adds to burnout.
Yeah.
So it's very much like this vicious cycle. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, Julie.
Yeah, so if you're asking about preventing burnout, you're probably
You're
somewhere
already
in
there.
you're probably like in the attention or
Right.
emotional like area of
Right.
burnout. Instead of worrying about making like a whole prevention plan, there's two things. Going back to that saying no to new, that's really important. And what I stress about that is it's not a no forever. And there are outliers. Like I always say, if Oprah wanted to talk about my book, if I was laying on the floor, I would figure out how to get up off
Right.
the floor and talk to Oprah, right? So there are exceptions. They're like once in a lifetime exceptions, though.
Right.
And then the second thing is looking at what is going on in your business and seeing what initiatives you can realistically pause. Because that is, whether it's you're launching, a new marketing plan or you want to possibly move your office space. If you are, these are these extra initiatives, not your day-to-day stuff that you got going on, these extra initiatives that we always put on our plate, special projects, that type of stuff. Writing a book, like those are types of things that if you can do them later and if you can pause them and just kick it down the road a little bit, which I think is really, that's a hard thing for a lot of business owners to do. But if you can do that and figure out which initiatives to just pause, again, you're not stopping, you're pausing them. That can help you start to navigate burnout and start to understand like this is what I'm going through. And it also frees up that space of okay, what do I need to do to address this from a business perspective? What do I need to delegate? What do I need to stop doing altogether? Those are the types of questions you got to ask yourself. But in order to even ask those and figure it out, I think you got to say no to new and you got to, find some room in your schedule. That means
Sure.
pausing initiatives to deal with the burnout.
So I can imagine that we have a lot of tough calls. Did you have to let go of anything? I know you spoke to people, told them, gave them their boundaries, and you were able to get the feedback. But what did you just let go altogether?
Well, you know, the 15 other businesses I want to start. Let's start
Yep.
there. I stopped podcasting.
Mm.
Oh,
I podcasted for about 3 years. It was a solo show where I would have, it was a mix of, just me talking about some things and then also having guests on. Um, I just totally stopped podcasting because it wasn't, I don't blame podcasting. I blame myself because I didn't have like a really clear marketing plan. It was just something that I wanted to do. And then it wasn't really benefiting my business and I stopped it. I dramatically scaled back on social media.
Hmm.
I have been very dark on social media since my father passed away in November last year.
Mm. All right.
And since then, I just I've barely been on social media. So those are some of the things that I think a lot of businesses think that they're necessary, given depending on what they do. But those are some things that I just flat out had to stop. And I loved podcasting. I loved doing it. I loved meeting all my guests and meeting all these people. But I just, it was a really hard decision because I loved doing it, but I just couldn't maintain it. So
Right.
that was
Right.
probably one of the hardest things, one of the hardest cuts I had to make.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I know I felt like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes even if you're not feeling burnt out, but a stressful situation can take you there, like from 0 to 100 of being burnt out. I know I've been in situations like that. And it's to the point where it is a health situation and it can, be detrimental to your health that you step away or step back or let go and let God. That's my whole thing. I'm like,
Right.
I've done all I can do at this point.
Right.
I can't anymore because at that point that means something's gonna happen to me from stressing too much and I'm not gonna be able to enjoy the other things that I have, like my grandchildren and stuff like that. What do you say if someone came to you with that? If they said, I was doing good just yesterday, but this happened today and I can barely breathe.
I've talked to a lot of business owners who have gone through this, and I've gone through it. Um, and there's two types of burnout, or two timelines I call it. One is chronic, which is kind of just that build up over time from the everyday piling on and stress. And then there is acute. And acute happens when something like that happens, when you have something happen, like a key employee suddenly resigns and they give you a week's notice,
Or no
or
notice.
no notice, yeah, or you lose a client that makes up 50% of your income.
Mhm.
Now, that's a financial conversation for a
That's
later
its
day,
own
but
issue.
I think we've gone through, like, most business owners have felt that pain, especially if you're like in a service business. Most business owners feel that pain. So I think it's important to understand that which kind of burnout you're dealing with, because the approach is different. So for something like an acute burnout, the good part of that is exactly what caused it. If you were going along just fine and all of a sudden something happened and now you can't get, you're laying on the couch face down and can't get up off the couch, what caused it. And if it's, for me, if it's something like, if it's grief, you got to go through grief. There's no, you give yourself a little bit of time to like deal with the thing that happened. Like when I had my panic attack, for example, I had to like instantaneously take 2 weeks off of work because I couldn't function. It was Panic attacks were just so interesting, but I just could not get it together to guide my team. And so I literally, the next day, I got on a very quick Zoom call with everybody and I was like, listen, this is what happened. I need you all to run this business for 2 to 3 weeks because I've got to focus on getting back on my feet.
Right.
So I think when you have an acute burnout, it's very important to just let some of your, like, if you're somebody who tends to be closed off, you got to find a way to, you got to ask for help. You got to ask for help from your team at work. You got to ask for help from your team at home, whatever that looks like. You have to be able to ask people for help. And if you don't have that team, when you if you don't have it, then you have to be able to I always say, like, I think it's always important to have like a therapist in your back pocket, even if you don't go to regular therapy,
Mhm.
somebody you can schedule like an emergency session with, or even like, if you in business, reach out to the people you have dinner with. Trish is somebody that I've texted when everything's hit ish has hit the fan.
Me
Right.
And
too.
you
I
know, I'm like, oh
have
my
a few
God.
texts
And
right now, even as we speak.
yeah, like I remember one time we went to dinner and she was like, you know what you got to do. And I was like, I don't want to do it. She was like, I know, but you got to do it. And it was just involved, an employee issue. So I think having that's when you have to have that network. And you've got to have, I think business owners have to have at least a couple of really close confidants who are also entrepreneurs,
Mm,
because your spouse is never going to get it, if they're not
Right.
running a business too. Like
mm.
people just don't
Yeah,
understand what we go through. So I think you lean on those people in that moment.
Right.
I just don't know how you get through without.
I agree.
Mhm.
I would agree for sure. So I do have another question for you. So when you were making the mindset shift in order to write this book, right? Like clearly you had gone through the panic attack. Clearly you had to develop a framework around mitigating and managing burnout. Is there anything that you would recommend for our listeners to do, like a journal prompt or a reflection question or something along those lines to kind of just say, what's something that they can actually like physically do to kind of almost like a litmus test for themselves?
Like a litmus test to see if they're going through burnout or
Yeah, to see if like, am I at a point now where I need to start scaling back? Like again, I know we've kind of sort of circled the
yeah,
drain on these, but I want them to walk away with almost like a homework assignment, other than reading your book, which we will get to how they can do
yeah,
that in a moment. But I'm just
yeah,
curious, like, are there journal prompts or is there any other
yeah.
kind of immediate question that they can ask of
So there's
themselves?
there's two there's two things I would do. Actually, I don't know if y'all know this, but ChatGPT and other generative AI tools have become excellent coaches. And I would say a great thing to do would be to go to ChatGPT and say, I am a entrepreneur and I think I'm in burnout. Here's what's going on. What do you
Right,
think?
Wow.
And you have a conversation with them.
Okay.
There's a bunch of ones that Copilot. There's just a lot of tools. So
right.
that is like, if you don't have a therapist, if you don't have somebody you can call right away, or if you're not comfortable doing it, that's become kind of a go-to thing that I've recommended to people. Knowing whether or not you're in it, I would say, what is something that you measure about yourself?
Mm-hmm.
So if you measure your sleep, if you measure your heart rate, we
Right,
almost all of us wear these watches, right? So you figure out, what does it look like when you're not, when you're just kind of dealing with some everyday manageable stress. And then what does it look like when you're burned out? And, you identify that by kind of looking at your past and saying, well, when I'm like super overwhelmed and super stressed, I'm sleeping, 3 hours a night for, a long period of time. So if you typically get 7 hours of sleep and you're getting three, one, you're going to know you're in burnout. But if you're anywhere in between that, you're going to know how close to burnout you actually are. So that's kind of what I talk about with the measurement of stuff. Is there's ways that we can measure these indicators for burnout and turn it around before we get all the way into full-blown burnout. So if you're wondering if you are, I mean, look at your sleep, are you making it to, the T-ball games, or the children,
right,
your kids' functions? Like, how many of those are you keeping on in your schedule? Just things that you can actually count, because I think it's really hard for us to gauge our own emotions.
right.
So I'm an accountant, I really get into this. So I look for things that you can actually measure,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're in this place of, am I even burned out?
Right,
So if you can figure that out, like, oh, well, I got, 7 notifications on my watch this week that my heart rate was too high. That might be an indication that
right.
you're dealing with some burnout,
Right.
So
Or there's
uh,
a significant change in your behavior. That's a metric you can track.
yeah, yeah, like
So,
I think we go through periods of time where we're not excited to get up and go to work every day, as an entrepreneur. Like, that's part of why we become entrepreneurs, is to do something we love to do. And some of that's normal, but if you're doing that, if every single day you dread getting up in the morning, it's time to, kind of check into that and check in with yourself and tell somebody about it. Tell your business owner friend that, man, I just, the past month or two, I just have not wanted to do this anymore. Everything starts with awareness. And I always go to, it's important to have an awareness of what your baseline is. And it's important to have an awareness when you get outside of that baseline. And the best way to do that is to look at things that we already track about ourselves instead of creating a new system. Instead of going out and buying that new Apple Watch, use the thing you already have that's already working.
Right.
That's how I look at that.
I wanted to add because I feel like your circle, your group of peers, your people you go to dinner with, like you said, could recognize that too. And I say that because just, we tend to run, run, run and go, go, go and do, do, do. And we just keep going and keep going till we can't. And sometimes we just don't recognize that we might be burnt out or might be heading into that direction. But just last week, my cousin was like, "Can I go? We need to have a cousin's day." And I was like, "Okay." But she wanted it during the week on a Tuesday. And I'm like, I don't know if I could do a Tuesday. Like I got all this stuff to do. So I packed my bags thinking we were gonna go to an appointment or something. She took my phone, which was like, wait, that's my lifeline. How do you do that? This was Tuesday this week. She took me to get my nails done first, took my phone from the salon, and she said, you can check your phone for 15 minutes when I give it back. And I'm gonna do that twice today. So then we went to this wonderful spa in South Park area here in Charlotte. And that massage was amazing. 80 minutes too. I'm like, oh my goodness. Then we went to this beautiful restaurant afterwards. And she's like, when you came over last week, you just didn't seem right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure you knew that you're appreciated and you just need to take a minute to disconnect. And I was like, oh man, oh my goodness, I had such a good time. The restaurant we're gonna have to go to, Trish. But I had
Uh,
such a
I just
good
want to let
time.
my put my cousins on notice that this is what Brenda's cousin did. So cousins, I
Yeah.
just need to put you on notice
Yes,
that
she did all of that. And
that's right. Like the bar has been set,
but
friends.
I didn't know at the time that the things that I was saying was throwing red flags to people. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? She picked up on it and then brought it back to me and was like, you got to step away for a second. I mean, by the end of the night, I felt like it was Sunday night and it's tomorrow's Monday. I was like, oh Lord, now I got to get back into work mode. But that whole day was beautiful. Thanks to Frida.
And there's so much value in sometimes the people that know you best, um, they see it before you do.
Right.
Hmm.
And so again, that's why it's important to have those support structures built because somebody like Frida, I mean, that's amazing. I tell my friends, like, you have permission to, like, listen, if you think that I'm just being crazy and doing too much and burning out, like, you completely have permission to tell me that. And please
Sure.
tell me that. And that's
Mhm.
actually how I ended up not podcasting. My
Right.
my my best friend said, "Listen, I'm concerned about you. The last time we talked, you said you had 5 things that you had to do and you couldn't stop doing any of them. And podcasting is not bringing value to you,
Oh,
to your
mhm.
business, because
Hmm.
we had talked about that." So she was, she kind of prompted that to for me to really evaluate that. So yeah, it's crucial to have those people in your life, and I think it's also important to let them know it's okay for them to say something because sometimes,
Yeah.
Hmm.
people don't want to, inject themselves into your lives in that way. But if you let them know it's okay, then they're going to be more likely to mention something to you like that.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I like that.
Hmm. So what's next for you, Julie? And where can everybody get your book?
Yes.
Yeah. So next for me is I'm going to continue helping business owners make more profit and stress less. I mean, that's really my mission overall. I do that through services, through accounting services, through workshops, teaching all kinds of different things. my book is on Amazon in every format. So if you like
Hmm.
Audible, it's on Audible. If you ebook, Kindle, it's Amazon's the best place to get it. It's also in some local stores, Barnes and Noble. It made it into Powell's out in Oregon, which was like amazing.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah, it's in a lot of places, but Amazon be Amazoning. So if
Right,
you like
that's
Yes, it
that,
right.
is.
get it there, no problems with that. Yeah, and next for me is I am working on another book,
Hmm.
working through what that looks like, really leaning into being an author and really being an author,
Hmm.
just saying
Nice.
that that's what I'm doing. But I have such a passion for entrepreneurship because we're the lifeblood of our communities. We do not have thriving local communities. We don't have diversity in our communities without entrepreneurship. And that's at the heart of why I do what I do because I where I grew up, the whole town ran on entrepreneurship. And I think the more of that we have, the better we all are. And that's why I do what I do.
Well, we definitely thank you and appreciate it. And thanks for bringing the light to burned and being burned out and all the things and integration instead of balance, because I think that people need to understand the difference. And it is. So I appreciate everything. You gonna wrap us up, Trish?
I am. I'm going to wrap us up right here. So, for those listeners, if today's episode hit you in the gut, and I can only imagine that it did because I know that anybody who's read the book or has experienced burnout understands it all too well. So, if this hit you in the gut, take a pause, take a breath, and remember there is, in fact, a resource out there so that you can run your business without running on empty. So, in addition to subscribing and sharing and leaving a review for Breaking Even Better, please go out and pick up Julie's book. It really is not just a commiseration, but a prescription of how to address and manage and mitigate your burnout. So, with that said, I would like all of you to continue breaking even better.
Better.
Thank you so much for listening to the Breaking Even Better podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a minute to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content. To connect with our podcast or any of us individually, make sure you head to the show notes for all the links you need. See you in the next episode.